Just doing English 12 here, everybody. Hope you're all having a great day. We're gonna do this. I'm gonna read you the story. I'm doing English 12. I'm doing this to like study and stuff, so I can remember what I'm reading, and then I can replay it and everything. So that's the point of this post. Yeah, Pretty Like a White Boy: The Adventures of a Blue-Eyed Egyptian. Here we go, by Drew Hayden Taylor. In this big, huge world with all its billions and billions of people, it's safe to say that everybody will eventually come across personalities and individuals that will touch them in some peculiar way, yet poignant way. Individuals that in some way represent and help define who you are. I'm no different. Mine was Kermit the Frog. Not just because natives have a long tradition of savoring frogs' legs, but because of his music. If you all may remember, Kermit is quite famous for his rendition of It's Not Easy Being Green. I can relate. If I could sing, my song would be It's Not Easy Having Blue Eyes in a Brown-Eyed Village. Yes, I'm afraid. It's true. The author happens to be a card-carrying Indian. Once you get past the aforementioned eyes, the fair skin, the light brown hair, noticeable lack of cheekbones, there lies the heart and spirit of the Ojibway storyteller. Honest Injun, or as more politically correct term may be, honest Aboriginal. You see, I'm the product of a white father I never knew, and an Ojibway woman who evidently couldn't run fast enough. As a kid, I knew I looked a bit different, and then again, all kids are paranoid when it comes to their peers. I had a fairly happy childhood, frolicking through the bulrushes, but there were certain things that even then made me notice my unusual appearance. Whenever we played cowboys and Indians, guess who had to be the bad guy? The cowboy. It wasn't until I left the reserve for the big bad city that I became more aware of the role people expected me to play, and the fact that physically I didn't fit in. Everybody seemed to have this preconceived idea of how every Indian looked and acted. One guy on my first day of college asked me what kind of horse I preferred. I didn't have the heart to tell him hobby. I've often tried to be philosophical about the whole thing. I have both white and red blood in me. I guess that makes me pink. I'm a pink man. Try to imagine this. I'm walking around on any typical reserve in Canada, my head held high, proudly announcing to everyone I am a pink man. It's a good thing I ran track in school. My pinkness is constantly being pointed out to me over and over and over again. You don't look Indian. You're not Indian, are you? Really? I got questions like that from both white and native people. For a while, I debated having my status card tattooed on my forehead. And like most insecure people, especially a blue-eyed native writer, I went through the particularly severe identity crisis at one point. In fact, I admit it, one depressing spring evening, I dyed my hair black, pitch black. The reason for such a dramatic act, you may ask, show business. You see, for the last 8 years or so, I've worked in various capacities in the performing arts, and as a result, I'd always get calls to be an extra or even try out for an important role in some native-oriented movie. This anonymous voice would phone having been given my number and asked if I would be interested in trying out for a movie. Being a naturally ambitious, curious, and greedy young man, I would always readily agree. Stardom flashing in my eyes and hunger pains from my wallet. And a few days later, I would show up for the audition, and that was always an experience. What kind of experience, you may ask? Picture this. The picture calls for the casting of 17th century Mohawk warriors living in a traditional longhouse. The casting director calls the name Drew Hayden Taylor, and I enter. The casting director, the producer, and the film's director look up from the table and see my face. Blue eyes flashing in anticipation. I once was described as a slightly chubby beach boy, but even beach boys have tans. Anyway, there would be a quick flush of confusion, a recheck of the papers, and a hesitant Mr. Taylor. Then they would ask if I was at the right audition. It was always the same. By the way, I never got any of the parts I tried for, except a few anonymous crowd shots. Politics tells me it's because of the way I look. Reality tells me it's probably because I can't act. I'm not sure which is better. It's not just film people either. Recently I've become quite involved in theater, native theater to be exact. And one cold October day, I was happily attending the Toronto leg of province-wide tour of my first play, Toronto at Dreamers Rock. The place was sold out, the audience was very receptive, and the performance was wonderful. Ironically, one of the actors was also half white. The director later told me he had been talking with the actor's father and an older non-native type chap. Evidently, he had asked a few questions about me and how I did my research. This made the director curious, and he asked about the father's interest. He replied he got an amazing grasp of the native situation for a white person. Not all these incidents are work-related either. One time, a friend and I were coming out of a rather upscale bar. We were out yuppie watching and managed to catch a cab. We thanked the cab driver for being so comfortable close on such a cold night. He shrugged and nonchalantly talked about knowing what bars to drive around. If you're not careful, you'll get is drunk Indians. I hiccuped. Another time, this cab driver droned on and on about the government. He started out by criticizing Mulrooney, eventually to his handling of the Oka crisis. This perked up my ears, and he said if it were me, I'd have tear gassed the whole place by the second day. No more problem. You got a dime tip. A few incidents like this, and I'm convinced I'd make a great undercover agent for one of the native political organizations. But then again, even native people have been known to look at me with a fair amount of suspicion. Many years ago, when I was a young man, I was working in a documentary on native culture up in the wilds of northern Ontario. We were at an isolated camping filming a trapper woman and her kids. This one particular 9-year-old girl seemed to take a shine to me. She followed me around for 2 days, both annoying me and endearing herself to me, but she absolutely refused to believe that I was an Indian. The whole film crew tried to tell her, but to no avail. She was certain I was white. The one day as I was loading up the cat with film equipment, she asked me if I wanted some tea. Being in a hurry, I declined the tea. She merely smiled with victory, crying out, "See, you're not an Indian. All Indians drink tea." Frustrated and a little hurt, I whipped out my status card and thrust it at her. Now, there was a standing... Thrusted at her. I was standing in the northern Ontario winter showing my status card to a 9-year-old non-status Indian girl who had no idea what one was. Looking back, this may not have been one of my brighter moves, but I must admit it was a native woman that boiled everything down in one simple sentence. You may know the woman, Marianne Jones, from the Beachcombers television series. We were working on a film together out in West, and we got to gossiping. Eventually, we got around to talking about our respective villages, hers on the Queen Charlotte Islands, or Haida Gwaii, as the Haida call them, and mine in central Ontario. Eventually, childhood on the reserve was being discussed, and I made a comment about the way I look. She studied me for a moment and smiled and said, "Do you know what the old woman in my village would call you? Isn't it but curious?" I shook my head. "They say you were pretty like a white boy." To this day, I'm still not sure if I like that. Now, some may argue that I am simply a Métis with a status card. I disagree. I felt French in grade 11, and the Métis, as everyone knows, have their own separate and honorable culture, particularly in Western Canada. And of course, I am well aware that I am not the only person with my physical characteristics. I remember once looking at a videotape of a drum group shot on a reserve up near Manitoulin Island. I noticed one of the drummers seemed quite fair-haired. fair hair. Stupid thing scrolling down. Okay, where the heck was that? I noticed one of the quite fair haired, almost blonde. I mentioned this to my girlfriend of the time. My girlfriend at the time, she shrugged, saying, well, that's to be expected. The highway runs right through the reserve. Perhaps I'm being too critical. There's a lot to be said for both cultures. For example, on the left hand, you have the native respect for elders. They understand the concept of wisdom and insight coming with age. On the white band, there's an Italian food. I mean, I really love my mother and family, but seriously, does anything really beat good veal scallopini? Most of my Aboriginal friends share my fondness for this particular brand of food. Wasn't there a warrior at Oka named Lasagna? I found it ironic, though curiously logical, that Columbus was Italian. The connection, I wonder. Also, Native people have this wonderful respect and love for the land. They believe they are part of it, a mere chain in the cycle of existence. As many of you know, this conflicts with the accepted Judeo-Christian Western view of land management. I even believe somewhere in the first chapters of the Bible it says something about God giving man domination over nature. Check it out, Genesis 4, thou shalt clear cut. So I grew up understanding that everything around me is important and alive. My native heritage gave me that. And again, on the white hand, there's breast implants. Damn clever, them white people. That's something Indians would never have invented. Seriously, we're not ambitious enough. We just take what the Creator decides to give us. But no, not the white man. Just imagine it. Some serious-looking white man, and let's face it, people we know, it was a man who invented them, don't we? So just imagine some serious looking white doctor sitting around in his laboratory muttering to himself, big tits, big tits. How do I make big tits? If it was an Indian, it would be big tits, big tits. White women sure got big tits, and leave it at that. So where does that leave me on the big philosophical scoreboard? What exactly are my choices again? Indian respect for elders, love the land, white people, food, and big tits. In order to live in both cultures, I guess I'd have to find an Indian woman with big tits who lives with her grandmother in the cabin out in the woods and can make fettuccine alfredo on a wood stove. Now let me make this clear. I'm not writing this for sympathy or out of anger or even some need for self-glorification. I'm just setting the facts straight. For as you read this, a new nation is born. This is the Declaration of Independence, my Declaration of Independence. I spent too many years explaining who and what I am repeatedly. So as of this moment, I officially succeed from both races. I plan to start my own separate nation because I am half Ojibway and half Caucasian. What we would call the Caucasians. And of course, since I'm founding the new nation, will be called Special Occasion. It's actually kind of funny.